Today, we're diving into a really fascinating collection of essays by Noam Chomsky called Interventions.
Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems shaping our world, one book at a time.
And this book is a perfect example of that. It pulls back the curtain on the hidden system that filters our public debate. You know, the one that decides which ideas get a platform and which ones get pushed to the side. And even though these essays were written back during the Iraq War era, you'll see that the system he's describing, well, it's as relevant today as it's ever been.
To really get what this book is about, you have to start with its own strange backstory. Because honestly, the story of how this book came to be is a fascinating paradox in itself.
So get this, after the massive success of his book 9/11, Chomsky started writing these short, punchy op-eds. And we're not talking about some small underground publication. These were distributed by the New York Times Syndicate, a huge mainstream media player that sends articles out to newspapers all over the globe.
But here's the crazy part. While newspapers around the world, in Mexico, the UK, you name it, were snapping these articles up, the major American papers, the so-called newspapers of record, like the New York Times itself, the Washington Post, the LA Times, they all took a pass. They refused to print them.
And that lands us right on the central question we're going to explore. Why? Why on earth would the country's most respected newspapers turn down articles from a world-famous, best-selling author that their very own syndication service was trying to sell? The answer tells you pretty much everything you need to know about how our media system really works.
And that answer brings us to the core idea of this whole explainer, a concept we can call the narrow corridors of debate.
In the book's foreword, Peter Hart just nails it. He explains that the op-ed page isn't really the open marketplace of ideas we might imagine it to be. Instead, its main job is to draw a line in the sand. It clearly marks the boundaries of what is and what is not considered acceptable debate among the people in charge.
And that is exactly what we mean by the narrow corridors of debate. It's this very limited range of opinions that powerful political and corporate interests are comfortable hearing. If your idea is inside the corridor, great. Let's talk about it. But if it's outside, well, it's just going to be ignored or maybe even ridiculed.
And this is where you really see the gap between what these institutions say they do and what they actually do. They all claim their mission is to offer a diversity of opinions, to challenge us. But what they often present is just a diversity of opinions within that very, very narrow corridor. It's not our debate. It's the debate the powerful will tolerate.
So how is this corridor kept so narrow? Well, one of the most powerful ways is just simple narrative repetition. For instance, right after 9/11, if you looked at the New York Times and Washington Post, they ran something like 44 columns pushing for a military response, versus only 2 that argued for anything else. When you see that, it creates this illusion of consensus that makes any other option seem, well, totally unserious.
Another key mechanism is this sort of moral framing. Chomsky points out that there's this unspoken rule in these debates. Our side is always the good guy. Our government's intentions are always presented as noble and benevolent, even when things go wrong. And this idea, this doctrine of good intentions, basically gives power a free pass from any real fundamental criticism. And finally, this system protects itself through what you could call elite insulation. Think about it. The pundits who were catastrophically wrong about huge decisions like the Iraq War, they face zero consequences. They keep their jobs, their columns, everything. But the critical voices, who consistently challenged the official story, they often get sidelined or, in some cases, pushed out entirely. It's a system that rewards conformity and punishes dissent. And that's how the corridor stays narrow.
So that's the system. That's how it works. But let's get to the big question. So what? Why does this system of filtered debate actually matter in the real world?
Let's zoom out for a second. What does all this really tell us about the relationship between democracy, the information we get, and how power manages to stay in power?
First off, it creates this huge disconnect. If you look at polls on major issues, from foreign policy to trade deals, you'll often find that what the public wants is completely different from the elite consensus you see debated on op-ed pages. By filtering out those popular views, the media makes what most people want seem totally irrelevant to the actual policy discussion.
Plus, the kind of criticism that is allowed inside that corridor is almost always just tactical. It's never fundamental. The analogy in the book is perfect. It's like a sports reporter arguing about the coach's bad play call. You can debate the strategy all day long, but what you can't do is ask the most important question: should we even be playing this game in the first place?
And when you put it all together, the end result is that it ensures the continuity of power. It does this by taking the very narrow interests of powerful corporations and politicians and labeling that the national interest. Meanwhile, the actual interests of the general public, things like healthcare, peace, job security, those get dismissed as naive special interests that just get in the way.
Now, this can all sound pretty discouraging, I know. But the book really isn't about despair. It's a critique for sure, but it's also a wake-up call. Because as the editor's note reminds us, one of the clearest lessons we can take from history is that rights and freedoms are never just handed down from on high. They are won through struggle, through understanding, and through the courage to speak up, especially outside those narrow corridors of acceptable debate.
This project is free and publicly accessible. If you'd like to support the time, tools, and research behind crisis and perception, you can become a supporter on Patreon. For a longer audio-based analysis of this topic, see the deep dive linked in the description. If you enjoy this kind of systems-level analysis, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next.